As we mark the World Press Freedom Day, journalists in Kenya continue to live in fear of assassination and threats coming from both state and non-state actors in their line of duty. This year alone, 2 journalists have been killed and assassinated in a span of a month. The gruesome murder of Jennifer Mumbua, a former Kenya News Agency bureau chief, and Betty Barasa, a senior video editor and television producer working for the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, paints a grim picture of the state of journalism in Kenya.
Our work as human rights defenders are basically considered journalists as human rights defenders also. So in one way or another in our work we interact with journalists, and we have had cases whereby they report threats, intimidation by virtue of their work. So we normally try to help come for their solidarity, report their cases, and then basically be there for them. So our work basically we have touched on issues of threats facing journalists, but then again in our country also we have seen a number of journalists have been actually killed in the line of work. Maybe they report issues of corruption. In that case, they are killed in the line of duty. So we have had many cases of journalists either being threatened, others are being actually assassinated.
Last year, on the World Press Freedom Day, a group of gangs waylaid and killed Mohammed Marjan, who worked for Pamoja FM as a presenter. On the other hand, was stabbed to death at 5 a.m. while headed to work in the morning.
My name is Joyce Kimani. I'm the regional coordinator for the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. We're a think tank of experts drawn from the academia, journalism, human rights defenders, diplomats, and our work is basically to fight the illegal crime markets through coming up with a counter market strategies. So we do this through analyzing the trends in the illicit markets, and part of our product is what we call the assassination witness, where we document and talk about the people who have either disappeared without a trace or they've been assassinated by state agents. Of concern is Kenya, where we've seen a lot of killings of journalists, which are mostly state perpetrated, where we have examples of people like Kitui, who was murdered as he was doing an investigation about a murder linked to the ICC cases, and we also have people like Monohe, who also was found dead in his house. The main concern is the increasing in numbers instead of reducing. This year alone we witnessed 2 murders of journalists, one who was supposed to be a state witness, Miss Jennifer, and she was due to appear in court and talk about a corruption scandal linked to the National Land Commission, linked to key politicians in the former government. Why this is worrying is because we feel like it has forced so many people to shrink. It has forced a lot of journalists to either abandon their duties. We've seen journalists, a lot of self-censorship in the local and international media when it comes to matters pertaining Kenya. And this is basically interfering with the democratic space. Journalists are not writing as much as it should. Journalists are not reporting, they're not exposing criminals and cartels. With less reporting, there's been a thrive in the criminal markets.
The 2021 World Press Freedom Index ranks Kenya 102nd out of 180 with a score of 33.65 in press freedom. The position marks a drop of 6 spots compared to the country's previous ranking in 2018. This is especially a worrying trend, with backlashes from even the highest office in the country rubbishing off the media. All is not lost, however. The move has led to the entrance of new form of media, and penetration of affordable internet has given rise to robust digital media platforms. We talked to the founder of Nakuru TV, an online TV station based in Nakuru, and this is what he had to say.
My name is Patrick Kinyo. I'm a journalist working in Nakuru. I work with Nakuru Television Network. On issues safety and security, first of all, I'll give you a perspective that I have about how this space works, and I can trace it back to independence, where a lot of our institutions, the nascent institution, especially with the media, were transformed by those who took power from the colonialists to become propaganda tools for the government. So, and not just in Kenya, in many states in Africa. So most of how those governments worked was that they picked the national broadcasters, the national papers, and those were eventually turned into attack dogs for the systems that were in place and propaganda tools for the government of the day. And so that is also where Kenya found itself at that point in time. And so throughout that whole period, up to 1992, where there was now clamor for multi-party, and so that clamor for multi-party also sort of made the media space to open up. So by opening up, we had different players, the private sector investing now in media and becoming a bit independent. But also, for those who were there then as leaders, they did not fancy that a lot. So there was systematic attempts to try and muzzle the press. And so even how our constitution was actually drafted was to constitutionalize some of these provisions so that then media freedom became a constitutional guarantee under the 2010 constitution. But of course, successive regimes in Kenya have been a bit apprehensive about how the media works, probably because the role of the media is to sort of just expose what is happening in government. And so for many African countries, we've seen governments and the media have a love-hate relationship most of the time, and it's mostly hate, because in the cause of journalists doing their work, they're exposing a thing or two about the government. It could be corruption, it could be cases of election malpractices, and especially during election time, that's when we've had a lot of issues to do with security as far as journalists are concerned. And so even after those safeguards were put into the constitution, we've seen, remember in sometime in 2017, the head of state saying that newspapers are just for wrapping meat. You see that is in a way attack on journalism as a profession. And so not just the head of state, but we've seen structures, institutions, and state bodies that are actually supposed to protect journalists and the whole country in terms of different people and how they work, having to sort of use their powers to muzzle or to try and make this other section of the society, the media practitioners, the journalists, even the media owners, to not work as they should, because the government has a role of making sure that every Kenyan is secure, everybody is secure in their line of work, everybody should be secure. But then that has been how the state has had this relationship that eventually now affects the security of journalists, individual journalists working for organizations, for news organizations. They've been put at a disadvantage because in the line of us doing our work, so you could be doing a story, you're doing an expose, corruption issue in your locality. But then that is also an issue because then the people that you mentioned, the body that is responsible for doing what they should not be doing, will eventually come at you, okay? And so they target you individually, not the media house, okay? So I could, for instance, say a story where a journalist was working on a story about how corrupt some officers within the Kenya Police Service are. And so these people get wind that this story is being done. And so what they do is they will victimize that journalist, there'll be threats or intimidations. And so that sort of affects how we are able to execute our work. And so the society that we are in, the state that we are in, we don't feel adequately protected to actually go out and do that which we are supposed to. because increased cases of course, victimization, targeting of journalists, online shaming. Yeah, we've had a lot of that going on, and so I feel that sort of derails the ability of journalists executing their work. And so how that works again, even as we look at this year's theme of the World Press Freedom Day, is that information for public good. But access to that information is very, very limited. Yeah, due to, of course, systemic structures that governments have that sort of seek to circumvent the law. There is a very clear constitutional provision on access to information, but how well that has worked 10, 11 years after we promulgated that constitution is also subject to a discussion. Okay, devolution brought about governments locally. Yeah, so the devolution sort of brought governance at a local level. The media did not devolve as fast, and so that's why, as we were saying, we find that there is need for such spaces where we can interact on local issues and be able to inform, because our first duty to the public that we serve is to inform them. And so while we are informing them, we're also giving them these skills, they have civic literacy, they can engage, they know what is due to them by the county governments, especially when it comes to issues of budgeting, public participation, because that is one of the most critical pillars of devolution. But for journalists working in this space and trying to actually contextualize this information and give it to the public in a manner that they may understand is a problem. And so we have to rely on some duty bearers within the system to give us a simplified or a contextualized version of some of these provisions. But so it becomes a problem to access that information. Why? Because most of these people are busy, so they'll never respond to your calls. They will tell you to email them your issues, and when you do that, they don't respond, and if they do, they don't do it on time. So that also affects our work, and that is just one facet of how access to information can serve, the whole public good. So those are some of the challenges. Those are some of the challenges that are being witnessed, and you see that is just on the information bit. But if you do an investigative piece, you do an expose, then you're also setting yourself up for intimidations. And in this country, there are documented cases where journalists were actually, disappeared. We have enough examples of people who are killed, in the line of duty. And so looking at that whole matrix, it means then the government ought to seriously look at how they can institutionalize some of
with the general elections set for 2022, the ranging pandemic, media stakeholders have already started experiencing threats and harassments by state and non-state actors, especially in the counties. Yet the shrinking media space has forced many journalists and media houses into self-censorship in fear of the state.
My name is Kioko Wakibandi. I am a journalist and a journalism trainer at Egerton University, and also a human rights defender in Nakuru, and much more specifically an advocate of media freedom and protection of the media space, or do you want to say media spaces in Nakuru. I would say that as a region, Nakuru is a very vibrant space for journalists, and I don't think there is any event concerning media that can happen in the country without Nakuru being involved. So much so that even just recently when the Media Council was expanding, this is one of the regions that was picked and acknowledged as being a key spot where a regional office of the council should be established. It's a very, very, very vibrant space, and it has its own position in the country. We have quite a number of regional bureaus of actually all the mainstream media houses in the country, up to and including some reporters who work with the international media outlets. And apart from that, then we have the regional based media houses. I don't like calling them local media houses. Sometimes when you're placing that word local, sometimes you make them look very, very simplistic, as if they don't deserve to be media houses in their own right. And we have quite a number of them, and the space is still expanding. We have new entrants almost every year. I think since 2018, we could say on average we have one in a year or two. We have a new entrant into the media space, and those that die, we always see someone, a new entrepreneur coming on board to revive them. So this is actually seen as a very important market. And then you know, just like the way you see supermarkets, trying to jostle for space within the town. And then apart from that, because of late when I'm talking about media spaces, I'm also talking, I also want to emphasize on the importance of the digital spaces, because of late we have seen them as very key players in the production, consumption and dissemination of content. And in this region we have very vibrant players in the digital space. One may, for instance, point out the fact that this is the place where a certain group called Nakuru Analysts started, and it brought in some kind of innovative way of discussion of governance, pushing for accountability and so on. So much so that even a certain scholar came to research on them. And what even that research did is that it connected between online discussions that end up being translated into offline actions, and therefore then the conclusion is that moving forward we have this, you see the way initially we would have what used to be referred to as Bunge la Wananchi, which was physical and so on and so forth. So this time then, Bunge la Wananchi and such platforms are being transformed or moved from physical contacts to digital contacts, and this is where now people organize themselves, and thereafter they translate their discussions into very tangible actions that actually bear fruits with respect to governance issues within a region. This is also the region where, and we are actually in the studio where a young man in this area started what he referred to as Nakuru TV, which is also a digital platform. With respect to the rights of then actors within these spaces, starting with journalists, we have seen the very way that we are usually active is the very way, again, you also see some kind of attempts to interfere with what we are doing, especially in the manner, especially when any actor within that space is doing something that the authorities or the powers that be are not happy with. And we have seen certain attacks directed to players within the digital spaces. With respect to journalists, in the last, we would say, 2 years, we've had a journalist, just recently we had a journalist who was attacked by the police on his way home during the corona period, you want to say past curfew hours. And we just made a conclusion that it's merely a misunderstanding of how the police should execute the orders that were given by the president on matters of the curfew hours. Apart from that, we also, and actually that same journalist was a while back also attacked, actually a year ago, attacked on his way home, but this was more of a criminal activity because he was attacked by street urchins on his way home, and so on and so forth. Those are the kind of attacks that we have seen here in the recent past, perhaps because we have not seen journalists really doing stories that star this kind of discomfort, a lot of discomfort among authorities. Although again, a year ago there was a story that was done by journalists, the corona story within the barracks, right? And that kind of caused some kind of discomfort, and therefore that was one of the best examples now where journalists are kind of targeted because of a story they have done which authorities are not happy with. And we went and visited the DCI here in Nakuru, and together with the lawyer of that specific media house, we tried to sort it out, of course by also calling other players, other stakeholders.
The relationship between the media and the government hasn't been of help. With the corona restrictions and the heightened political instability, media organizations have come under attack from the government with threats, summons and even physical attacks. For instance, the most recent case a few weeks to the World Press Freedom Day on April 25, 2021, 7 journalists were arrested and beaten by the police officers while covering the Tana Athi River Development Authority demolitions in Mbere, Embu. Another incident showing the unprofessionalism of Kenya Police Service on December 2020, Simon Ben from the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation KBC based in Nakuru was ill-treated and harassed by police officers. Simon was filming a scuffle between a motorist and traffic police officers when the police attacked the motorist and soon they turned their wrath on Simon, who was recording the ordeal.
My name is Caroline Chebet. I'm an environmental investigative reporter based in Nakuru, Kenya. I have been working on investigative stories for almost, I think this is my 3rd year doing investigative work. As an investigative reporter, there are the challenges, there are the highs and there are the lows. And mostly the lows override the highs. The challenges mostly include threats. While doing these investigative stories, it is usually not very easy to tell stories that incorporate crime in it, illicit flow of resources or money. There are usually people who are out there trying to come in between, and because there is always that fear of exposure. So mostly they try to threaten journalists. Mostly these journalists face threats from messages. They call people they can warn you via text messages. They can warn you via through calls, but they usually don't reveal their contacts. You just get a text that you are not supposed to. Kindly don't continue venturing into that report. As much as it takes a lot of courage to venture into investigative journalism, at some point you really feel like no story is worth your life. As much as there is so much we really have to tell, but then there is so much threats these journalists are facing, and we've seen cases of journalists disappearing. They are threatened, and again they don't have the security, which is really very hard, because if the police were there to really help these journalists, to offer protection, then there is even much more we could do. But then you find some of the stories you have to drop midway because of your security.
I'm called Joseph Omonde. I'm the executive director of an NGO called Mid-Rift Human Rights Network, registered as Mid-Rift Hurinet, based here in Nakuru, but we work in Nairobi, Nakuru, Baringo, Kisumu, and Uganda. We have put our programs in two broad thematic areas. One of the thematic areas is governance and human rights. The other thematic area is peace and security. So we work with the various stakeholders, including journalists, state and non-state actors, with an objective of inculcating a culture of human rights, good governance, and peace and security into their working. What I've observed is that since the promulgation of the Constitution, I see there's a lot of robustness in the media, but we are also seeing a situation whereby the state actors are still clawing back on some of the gains that we got in the Constitution. And in my observation is that still the state actors are not ready to share information that to the media, so that the media can relate to the larger population because of their mandate. The other thing that I've observed is that this is still resistance in terms of state agencies embracing the spirit of access to information, because the media should be given the information so that, as I've said, to relate to the bigger, larger population, because that promotes also the good governance that is captured in Article 10 of the Constitution about principles of governance and national values. So there is still some resistance from some quarters not to give the media the leeway and the freedom and the platform to work the way it was envisioned in the Constitution. We have very, very worrying trends whereby, for example, the journalists who are doing investigative pieces are being threatened, and some of them do disappear because maybe some people in power do not want the information to be relayed to the public. And what we are doing as an organization, being a human rights organization and also being champions of governance, the media is part of us in terms of the civic space that we are all working with. So one is about creating synergy. When we are talking about issues of governance, we're talking issues of human rights, it can best be amplified by the media. So the civil society, one should not work in isolation. They should work with the media so that we create synergy, because all of us have one objective. It's about information sharing, It's about capacity building people. It's about creating awareness. So we need to work together. The second issue, we should make sure that just the way some of us did when the DCI purported to have summoned the royal media, through the police reforms working group, there was a statement we gave out because we are part and parcel of that particular police reforms working group, and we gave them, we said that particular journalists need to be protected. It's obvious that journalists cannot share with you the sources, and therefore the purported summoning is against the law, and that is something that they should forget about the raw media honoring the summon. So one of the bigger issues is to make sure that we work together. We make sure that, one, the issues about human rights, in our constitution, human rights chapter is the biggest, and it's not by mistake, it was by design. So that we make sure, one, Article 35 that talks about access to information. We make sure that any state agency respects that. Article 34, we in the civil society must make sure that the state honors and respects Article 34 of the Constitution, which talks about freedom of the media. Third, and more fundamentally, in our respective regions where we are working, if any journalist is threatened or harassed, we need to make sure that our voice is heard. We must protect them. We must make sure that stakeholders are aware about the role of the media. For example, right now, the media are the first lot of the people who are categorized as essential service provider. But recently one of us was harassed at night, and we were able to make sure that he recorded the statement. We are doing a follow-up on the same, our brother Murunga. So we must make sure that those should not be just isolated cases. We must make sure all the media personnel, all the journalists are protected. We must make sure we work together. We must make sure we create synergy so that people realize that just as people in the 17th century who said that the media is the fourth estate, it becomes the fourth estate. In regards to witness protection, one, as a country, we must be very serious. We should not be passing laws, then at the implementation level, we don't implement. We passed the witness protection law, but the problem has been through our investigation, there has never been funding. Because if you pass that particular law, then create that agency, there must be funding so that where the journalist will be, that journalist will be comfortable, both physically and also mentally. And also, in regard to that particular matter, the family need to be looked. If he had a family, for example, it must be cared for. So we must make sure that we put money whenever we pass certain legislations, so that it's not just ticking the boxes, the law has been passed. So that is something that we need to push the government to be serious. We must push also the members of parliament. When we are making the budget making process, do we really look at certain things that need to be funded so that these things become a reality? The other issue is, as the civil society, we have been looking for other agencies to protect some journalists, of which we cannot speak in the media, because also we want to protect those particular agencies, because I have 2 to 3 journalists who are benefiting from external partners, so that those people's security can be guaranteed. Because the trick here we are getting is that sometimes the rule of law, as the Swahili says, inatupiga chenga. Because whenever, for example, a journalist is confronting some powerful people in government, it's very, very hard to protect that guy in the country. Because it's the same police who should be protecting that particular guy who report somewhere to the people who maybe that journalist wants to smoke out. So we must have a two-pronged approach. One, state agencies making sure that the witness protection platform works, but also we must have other alternatives.
We want to be the front liners when it comes to fighting for the rights of artists. According to this year, the Press Freedom Day, Kenya has been ranked number 1 or 2 in the out of a possible 180. That means that in terms of freedom of speech, Kenya is doing really bad, because just that means that the journalists, they risk a lot when they go out there to report, either from the threats, the intimidation, and sometimes you can even find that there will be death, because we've seen, I don't think it's a new phenomenon in Kenya, we've seen journalists being killed. It's an open secret. So in the recent years, we've seen journalists being killed. Some of them, it's probably because of the story they have done. Some are threatened, and it's unfortunate that some end dead. And I don't know, in this country, the cases, they take so much time that you don't get to the conclusion of the matter as who really killed that journalist, or for what reason they did that. And this makes it very, very wrong, because the family, the country, everybody deserves an answer to know why a journalist had to lose their life just because of relaying maybe information to the public, and it costed them their life. It's unfortunate. I call upon also the civil society to stand up for the rights of these journalists, because we are the voice. We are the voice. Recently, we saw in the media there's one Betty Baraza, an editor with the KBC, that was murdered in cold blood in her house, and it was really unfortunate. And we are hoping that there will be a conclusion to the matter as to why she was killed, because up to now the family are demanding answers. They don't even know why their kin was murdered. So as the civil society, as Arts for Rights, we are here to raise our voice. We are here to ask questions. We are here to ask why Betty was murdered, and the concerned and the government itself should know that we are demanding for answers as civil rights societies and as Art for Rights. So we should keep quiet until we get an answer.
Wednesday is 2nd December 2020, Angwe FM, a radio station in Voi, was attacked by police officers, a clear act of intimidation by the police for the journalist covering a student's riot that was taking place hours after they interviewed the students. According to the Media Council of Kenya, they have on several occasions brought to the attention of the Police Inspector General, Mr. Hilary Mutyambai, the many pending cases of attacks against journalists reported in several police stations across the country, whose investigations have either stalled or have never taken off. The prosecution of a suspected murder of a journalist in Kenya remain wanting. Francis Nyarai and Kitui cases are unresolved, which add to the shocking UNESCO statistics, which states that only 1 out of 10 cases are resolved. Media freedom is a constitutional right provided for under Article 34 of the 2010 Constitution and should be protected by all, led by law enforcement agencies whom recently were aggrieved by an expose aired by Citizen TV. The editorial leadership of Royal Media Services was issued with summons by the Director of Criminal Investigations, George Kinoti, over the expose dated 18th April 2021 with the title Silaha Mitaani and Guns Galore, broadcast on Citizen TV. Summoning journalists about their work or coercing them to reveal their sources is a clear violation of press freedom and the Constitution. The role of civil society remains paramount in ensuring that the number of journalists killed or disappeared without a trace is eliminated. Whereas great strides have been made to ensure that journalists operate freely and fairly, much more needs to be done. With all said and done, what remains cardinal and the Cralion call is the words of Walter Cronkite, who said freedom of the press is not just important to democracy, it is democracy.